Okay, so today we are talking about how to create a master harms list using standard codes. But first, why? Why do we want to do that in the first place? Well, if you look at, according to the IMDRF, it's where all these regulatory bodies are meeting to harmonize the regulatory process or the regulatory expectations. They are saying why. Let's look at what they are saying. Accuracy of capturing and reporting adverse events. If you use standard terms and codes, the data is more accurate and more reliable. Reduced ambiguity, more effective evaluation of adverse events. So why are regulatory bodies interested in that? Well, they want to keep an eye on adverse events, right? And they want standardized reporting. It helps them to detect signals early, safety signals early, and do trend analysis through advanced querying. And why would they want to do that? Because that they can keep an eye on safety and effectiveness of medical devices in the post-market phase, so they can take regulatory action. Consistency in reporting across different jurisdictions. In EU, for example, there are many different countries, and they have their own reporting requirements. US, you have reporting requirements. Rest of the world, you have reporting requirements. All this vigilance data is accumulating. How to analyze and evaluate that in a consistent way. That's what the standard terms and codes allow us to do. Increase accuracy and reliability of information shared between regulatory authorities. For what? For regulatory action. And this action is not just in post-market, but also pre-market. Because if you go to them with a new regulatory submission, they're going to review that information against the background rates, related to a similar device. So they will have all this information at their fingertips because they have collected this data in a standardized way. So there is actually a guidance document here from IMDRF. You can download that and learn more about it, but there's a lot of information available on the internet about these standardized codes. What's happening in the US? Overall, the regulatory oversight is moving from passive to active. And what does that mean? Adverse events reporting is primarily a passive way of monitoring safety data, which is what we do today. But increasingly, regulatory authorities, especially the FDA, are moving towards more active surveillance. And for that, their vision is to transform the way medical device technologies are tested, approved, and monitored. So throughout the life cycle, they want to be more active. And if you are not aware of it, they have created something called a NEST Coordinating Center. NEST stands for National Evaluation System for Health Technologies. It's basically a sort of voluntary collaborative effort under the MDIC umbrella, which is Medical Device Innovation Consortium. Now, as risk practitioners, we have to keep an eye on all these trends and developments because they affect directly our work and how we can prepare our organizations for the future. So they have set this up. It has been going on for many, many years. FDA has funded them to create what? Create a repository, a resource for gathering of real-world data. And the purpose is to allow real-world evidence creation for faster regulatory approval, maybe of innovative devices. But a secondary intent, I think, is to monitor safety and effectiveness in a more active way. So this is what they are saying. They are saying that we are going to use the real-world evidence in pre-market activities, as I talked about, update medical device reporting requirements periodically, use of real-world data for post-market surveillance. And what I read between the lines is that it allows them to go after medical device manufacturers who they think are probably not as careful about their safety and effectiveness performance as they should be, because they'll have all this background rates. And why is it active? Because this is a group of data sources from payers, from regulators, from clinical groups, from the industry, patient groups. All this real-world data is being accumulated, and there is now an effort to analyze it and query it in a standard way. So standardization is really very, very important, and it's driving regulatory work in our space. The most recent initiative, I think what I heard from the NEST CC, was UDI adoption and application from electronic health records, integration of that. And once you have that, they have direct visibility to the link between a specific medical device and an adverse event. And once you have that and you can query that data, you can put two and two together and figure out which medical devices are not performing at the level that that is expected from them. So this is a background of why I think this is very important. As it stands today, we know that at least the FDA and regulatory bodies in Europe, they require use of standardized codes in adverse events reporting. In the FDA, you have the Form 3500, and which actually has fields where you have to put standard FDA codes. And in Europe, you have this manufacturer incident reporting, MIR, where again, you have to put IMDRF codes. So we're going to talk a lot more about these codes today. But the point here is that part of our organization is probably already doing it for adverse events reporting, right? We have all this complaints data flowing in, and we are looking at that data and making a determination of whether we need to report this or not for reportability purposes. And that process requires us to map what we have into our adverse events codes that are required for that form. So part of our organization is already doing that. But it is my experience that when it comes to risk management files, we are still using the codes and terms that we have in our own complaint handling system. That has been my experience. But if you are doing it differently, please share that with me in the Q&A box, or tell me if something is being done differently. But my experience really is that we are still using complaint codes. And today I'm going to show you why that might be a problem later on in this presentation, and why we should move to using standardized codes and terms, which in a way we are already doing today, right? So the second point I want to make is that regulatory bodies expect a direct link between post-market surveillance and your risk management files. If you are practicing 14971, which I think you are, Clause 10 requires us to look at post-market safety data and take appropriate action from the risk management point of view, which may include updating our risk management files, right? And why do we want to do that? We have to remember that risk management spans across the total product life cycle. So it's not just developing the product and getting regulatory approval or clearance and launching it. We don't stop there. We have to continue risk management throughout the product life cycle. And a major part of the life cycle for medical devices, I think, is the post-market phase, right? Let's play this out. Let's say maybe you spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years maybe developing a product. Maybe it's class 3 PMA device, took you a long time. You launch it, but guess how long it's going to stay in market? Maybe decades, maybe many, many years. So for medical devices, the post-market phase of the life cycle is incredibly important. And why do we have to have connection with the risk management file? Because as we review this, we have to continuously evaluate the benefit risk profile from a safety and effectiveness point of view. Are we still at the same level of performance as we were at launch, or as we were when we went to the regulatory bodies for device approval? We have to constantly evaluate that. And how do we do that? We have to look at new failures, new failure modes, new causes, changes in occurrence rates, to update our engineering analysis, identify and implement new risk control measures. That's part one. The second part is new hazards, new hazardous situations, new harms, changes in occurrence rates, to update our hazard analysis and update our risk acceptability. And then there is a correlation between the two. So there are standard codes for device malfunctions, which are called device problem codes, and standard codes for patient problems, which are, I'm going to talk about that today. And regulatory bodies are already using that. So unless we start using these standard terms in our own risk management files, how would we know what the real world performance of our device is in comparison to other similar devices? So let's take a step back. Benefit risk or safety effectiveness is not an absolute measure. It is a relative measure compared to what else is out there. I don't want to go into the state of the art conversation in this webinar. We can have a webinar exclusively on state of the art. If you guys are interested, let me know in your comments below. We can talk about that, but we are always evaluating benefit risk in relation to something else. If that's something else, we don't monitor, and regulatory authorities are monitoring that through this mining of adverse events data, which is being reported to them in a standard way. How are we going to know? So that is really main business case for us to start using it, so that we are in a way in sync with how regulatory authorities are evaluating the safety and effectiveness of our own medical device in relation to other similar medical devices. That's the main business case. But the second reason I'm going to talk about in this presentation today is that when you use complaint codes in your existing complaint system, which has evolved maybe over several years, you are probably using a lot of redundant terms, which may mean the same thing. And as a result, you are actually diluting your signal. And that results in inaccurate risk estimation. I'll show an example of that today with you, and hopefully that clarifies what I'm talking about. But that's the other reason. Do not underestimate risk, because that is one very straightforward reason why FDA might issue a warning letter. In fact, they have issued warning letters to several big names because they did not really agree with their method of calculating risk. So FDA goes after, when they have suspicion that you are underestimating risk, they will go after you. So that's another reason. Okay, so in the rest of the presentation, I'm going to go over the taxonomy of these codes, which has been established. And I'm going to tell you what are the different systems that are being used, give you some examples, share with you a case study example of how you can actually set it up for yourself, a standard table. And then finally, close with an example of how using redundant complaint codes or complaint terms for calculating risk may lead you to calculate it incorrectly.